Hi, I'm Brian. Welcome to Boss City. In this episode, we're taking another road trip to Gotham City to pull back the cowl and dig deeper into the TV series that changed pop culture overnight and then fell out of fashion almost as quickly, the 1966 Batman TV series. Along the way, we'll unravel a few mysteries that have followed it for decades. Did NBC really try to save it for a fourth season? Why were some of the most popular villains recast? And how did Jingle Bells, Batman Smells become the most persistent earworm of all time? We'll answer those questions and so many more. When Batman premiered on ABC in January of 1966, it became an instant phenomenon. Viewers saw a show that was colorful, fast, funny, and unlike anything else on television. The show's producer, William Dozier, saw Batman as an intentional parody, a live-action comic book that mocked its own hero while reveling in the weirdness of the 1960s pop culture with a heavy dose of camp. And it worked. For a brief moment, Batman became the most talked about show on television. And if you watched my previous Boss City episode, Batmania, Holy Flash in the Pan Batman, you know how intense that cultural wave was. And there's a link in the description below. But this time, we're taking a look at some of the speculation, unanswered questions, rumors, and myths that have taken on lives of their own thanks to the internet. Let's start off with the NBC fourth season myth. If you've heard any story about Batman 66, you've probably heard this one. After ABC canceled the show in early 1968, 2 weeks later, NBC agreed to pick it up for another season, but they discovered that 20th Century Fox had already destroyed the sets, and they were not interested in spending the hundreds of thousands of dollars needed to rebuild the expensive sets. And so NBC dropped the project. It's a story that's been repeated in interviews, fan forums, on IMDb and Wikipedia, books about the series, even cast members' memoirs, and it's dramatic enough to sound true. But the evidence tells a different story. So let's break it down. First, from a business standpoint, would NBC want to renew an expensive show like Batman, which by then was ranking in the low 40s in the Nielsen ratings? Some shows in that territory would get renewed, but most didn't. So it's possible, but not likely. Next, while it's true that studios typically dismantle sets soon after a series wraps, would Fox really have bulldozed the Batcave if they had any real interest in moving Batman to another network? Besides, it wouldn't have been NBC's responsibility to rebuild the sets. That cost would have fallen on the studio. Now, it's possible that NBC showed interest and it was Fox that didn't want to spend money on the new sets. But the story is usually told the other way around, that NBC backed out because they didn't want to pay for rebuilding. In reality, Fox may have killed the deal themselves by bulldozing too early. But NBC didn't walk away because of the sets. The next question is, would Fox or Dozier's Green Ray Productions have wanted to produce more Batman episodes for any network? Well, let's take a look at that. Because they produced 2 episodes a week for the first 2 seasons, 120 episodes were generated in just 3 years, and well above the 100-episode threshold needed for a lucrative syndication sale. Would a studio want to continue losing a reported $26,000 per episode when they did not need any more episodes? Possible, but not probable. So let's dive into what really happened. Okay, the final episode was filmed on December 21st, 1967, and by January 3rd, Fox executives were already speaking of Batman in the past tense to Variety magazine, referencing revenue from daily reruns. On January 18th, Variety announced exclusively that ABC had canceled the show. A few days later, Dozier got into a squabble with ABC exec Leonard Goldberg in the New York Times about whether the show was really canceled. Goldberg told the New York Times that they had not notified Dozier of a cancellation because no decision had been made. In the same story, Dozier stated that Batman was not returning no matter what the network says. If ABC was not the source of the Variety article, who was? Was Fox and Dozier trying to force ABC into an early cancellation? Well, now here's where things get really interesting. On January 26, 1968, in response to the New York Times story, William Dozier told Variety that by failing to schedule summer reruns, ABC had essentially given up its option to keep Batman. Now, those words sound like a producer wanting to cash out, not the words of a producer fighting to keep a series alive. And just days later, Variety reported that 20th Century Fox had already placed Batman in syndication, earning $2 million in sales within the first week, expecting sales as high as $3 or $4 million. So Batman was already being sold to local stations while it was still airing new episodes on ABC. So that was the last week of January 1968, less than a month after the show's final episode had wrapped. And so this is very unusual, because studios would typically wait until networks announced their scheduling decisions, and that usually would happen in the spring. And series typically would not be offered into syndication until the following year after cancellation. But Batman arrived at local stations in September 1968, just 6 months after the last new episode aired on ABC. And once those rerun sales began, Batman was finished as a network property. There was no way NBC or anyone else could have stepped in after that. So the truth is, Batman didn't die because NBC backed out or because the sets were destroyed. It ended because Dozier and Fox wanted to enter the syndication market more than they wanted to continue the show. They were selling the show into syndication before ABC ever officially pulled the plug. Therefore, NBC would not have had the opportunity to negotiate a deal for the show. Could someone at NBC have called someone at Fox just to inquire about the show? Well, not really. The Variety article about the show's cancellation was published on January 18th, and within the next week, Fox had already sold the reruns into LA, New York, Chicago, and other top markets. In short, NBC had never had the chance, and Fox never had the interest. It's one of those what-if stories that fans love, the idea that Batman was almost saved. But fan researchers who've combed through Variety and other 1968 trades have found no mention of any NBC pickup offer, none. So where did the story come from? Well, the first documented version comes nearly 20 years later. In 1986, Batgirl herself, Yvonne Craig, told Joel Eisner for the official Batman Bat book, when we were canceled by ABC, they wondered if we could get on another network. When it looked like we couldn't, they came in with a bulldozer and bulldozed the whole set, the Batcave and all of that. Then, 2 weeks later, NBC said, listen, we'd like to take a shot at Batman if you still have the set. They didn't want to start from scratch and build them because the set was $800,000. So it was too late and nothing came of it. It's a vivid story, but we know that by that time, Batman had already been sold into syndication, so the NBC call couldn't have happened. Now, how about Batman? What did he say? Adam West repeated almost the same story in his memoir, Back to the Batcave. Finally, Robin offered his take. In his 1995 book, Boy Wonder, My Life in Tights, Burt Ward wrote, I understand that when ABC canceled the series, NBC nearly made a deal to pick it up. Unfortunately, studio space at 20th Century Fox was at a premium, and some genius had all the Batman sets destroyed instead of stored. To replace those sets would have cost Batman's new network millions of dollars. Now notice here that Ward begins with, I understand that. Even he frames it as something he heard secondhand. Over time, these anecdotes, repeated by cast members, copied into books, and echoed across fan circles, solidified into what sounded like fact. The NBC pickup story is a myth that survives because it feels like the ending we wanted. The idea that Batman was just one bulldozer away from being saved. But the reality, Batman was gone not because NBC backed out, but because the show had simply run its course. The guest villains helped make the show so much fun. The original actors made such big impressions in their villainous roles, it was always disconcerting to see a new face in the old wardrobe. Which brings us to, why wasn't Julie Newmar in the 1966 Batman feature film? In March 1966, Julie Newmar guest starred on Batman with her instantly iconic performance as Catwoman. The day after her initial two-parter aired, it was announced in the press that she, along with 3 other villains, would be in the Batman feature film that was scheduled for an April start date. When the movie started shooting on April 26, Lee Merriweather replaced Julie with only a 48-hour notice. So what happened? For decades, the most popular answer has been that she was unavailable due to previous commitments. Even today, many Bat sources affirm this explanation. In interviews over the year, when asked, Newmar would change the subject or simply not answer. However, in a 1994 issue of Cinefantastique, writer Bob Garcia said that Newmar told him that she was unavailable to do the feature film because of other commitments. A&E biographies co-produced by Fox on the Batman series and about Julie Newmar from the early 2000s repeat the other commitments explanation. Her current Wikipedia page cites her involvement in a film prevented her from participation. Well, what other commitments could those have been? The most prevalent project mentioned has always been the film McKenna's Gold. To this day, a Google search on this matter lists countless sites that mention McKenna's Gold as the reason for her absence. On Gilbert Gottfried's podcast in 2015, Newmar's replacement, Lee Merriweather, said that she never knew why Julie wasn't in the movie, and when the host simply assumed it was McKenna's Gold, Lee said, maybe. The problems with these explanations is that her filmography does not list any projects that would have conflicted with the filming of Batman. McKenna's Gold was filmed in 1967, so that could not have kept her away. So what is the real reason? In July 2004, a new twist was unveiled nearly 40 years after the movie was filmed. Yet another A&E biography related to Batman was released, Catwoman, Her Many Lives. It contradicts decades of reporting, retelling, and Newmar herself by revealing that Newmar was unable to reprise her role because of a back injury. A few entertainment and fan sources now quote the A&E biography explanation. Now, what about this back injury? Could it be true? Even though there were no reports of it for nearly 40 years, and Newmar has not shared that reason? Researching the subject all the way back to the time of the Batman production, I was able to find a mention in an April 19th edition of Variety magazine that said she had to bow out because of recurrence of her chronic back ailment. Okay, so that was the reason reported in 1966. Was that true? Some on Bat message boards raised the possibility that the back injury was just a cover-up for a salary dispute. Just a month later, on May 17, 1966, it was announced that she joined the cast of an upcoming Tony Curtis movie, Don't Make Waves. And on June 22nd, she was back on the Batman set filming Hot Off the Griddle. Now, this might cause one to question the back injury scenario because now we're in June and she's already working on the Batman series, and the Batman movie was filmed in April. But then we learned that the July 8th Variety magazine reported Julie Newmar's back is acting up and she's out of Don't Make Waves. So there is our confirmation that Julie Newmar had a back condition that was, at times, serious enough for her to drop out of projects. Now let's take a look at the other Julie Newmar Batman mystery. Why was she replaced on the TV series after 2 seasons? When Catwoman made her first appearance of the 3rd season of Batman in December of 1967, suddenly it was singer-actress Eartha Kitt in the role. Where was Julie Newmar? The consensus seemed to be that she was busy filming the feature film McKenna's Gold for High Road Columbia Pictures, a Western featured ensemble cast led by Gregory Peck and Omar Sharif. And incidentally, Burgess Meredith also appeared in the film, but his small part did not interfere with the Penguin's season 3 Batman episodes. Over the years, almost without exception, McKenna's Gold is cited as the reason in books, including Adam West's memoir, on the Television Academy website, entertainment sites, Wikipedia, and social media pages about Batman. Julie Newmar repeated it on multiple occasions, including an April 1988 appearance on Fox's The Late Show, where she told Ross Schaefer that she was doing McKenna's Gold or something. So why is this a mystery? Well, McKenna's Gold started shooting in the American Southwest on May 16, 1967. However, Julie Newmar was not there because between May 19th and May 26th, she was at Desilu Studios in the Vasquez Rocks Natural Park filming the Friday's Child episode of Star Trek. She then joined the production in Arizona, Utah, and shot until September. The first season 3 Catwoman episode, Catwoman's Dressed to Kill, did not begin shooting until October 27th. That means that McKenna's Gold did not prevent Julie Newmar from appearing as Catwoman in season 3. She could have reprised her role if she had not been in London shooting another High Road Columbia Pictures film, Monsieur Lecoq. This film starred Zero Mostel and shot from September 14, 1967 until November 10, 1967. And there are photographs from the set of Julie Newmar dated October 10th. So we know that she was in London from at least that date until November 10th. And by the way, the film was left unfinished and unreleased. So the first Batman episode with Eartha Kitt, Catwoman's Dressed to Kill, commenced filming on October 27th. And we have documented that Julie Newmar was in England during that time and was therefore unavailable for any Gotham City shenanigans. Next up is Frank Gorshin, who originated the role of Riddler in the debut episode of Batman and played him in 7 additional episodes in the first season and in the feature film. As a result, his career exploded and he was inundated with job offers for nightclubs, TV guest spots, and even acting roles on Broadway. In May of '66, Gorshin admitted to Variety magazine that his Emmy-nominated role as Riddler had caused his nightclub fee to triple. But when Batman returned for season 2 in September, there were no Riddler episodes for 5 months. And when he finally did appear, it wasn't Frank Gorshin, it was John Astin. Gomez Addams. Which leads us to our next mystery. Why was Frank Gorshin replaced? In March 1989, Frank Gorshin told Bob Garcia in a Cine Fantastique article that the real reason John Astin played the Riddler was I had a nightclub commitment which I couldn't cancel. They wouldn't let me out and the studio wanted to do that episode at that time. So instead of waiting for me to finish, they figured I wasn't indispensable, and so they put my clothes on somebody else, and I was really offended that they did. The ever-popular Other Commitments line. However, further digging into the William Dozier archives reveals that Frank Gorshin's new agents were demanding a substantial raise that would reportedly double his pay as the Riddler. In a letter dated the day before filming wrapped on the Batman movie, Dozier wrote Gorshin, I had hoped you would be satisfied to reap your financial harvest from the multiplicity of opportunities playing the Riddler has opened up for you, rather than attempt to extract a fatter stipend from Batman. Our budget just can't stand it, as much as we shall dislike having to recruit another Riddler. So perhaps the real answer is another familiar Hollywood story, the contract dispute. The producers waited until February of '67 to recast the part, which makes me wonder if they were hoping to come to terms with Gorshin. In the meantime, the producers shot a script originally intended for Gorshin's Riddler. They rewrote it and renamed the villain the Puzzler. By August of '67, with the zenith of Batmania far in the past, Dozier and Gorshin were apparently more malleable to compromise as Gorshin returned to the Batfold for a final Riddler episode, Ring Around the Riddler. Every year around the holidays, when I hear someone say Jingle Bells, the first thing that enters my mind is Batman smells, Robin laid an egg. Do you remember hearing it? I first heard it at school in the late '60s and assumed someone at school came up with it. So in the '70s, I was shocked when a friend from out of town sang it to me. And I was flabbergasted when I heard Bart Simpson sing it in a TV promo for The Simpsons. And I thought it was classic meta when the Joker sang it on Batman the Animated Series, emphasizing the Joker got away line. Where did it come from? No one knows who composed the timeless parody lyrics. Since Weird Al has never claimed it, I think we'll never know. But how did this little ditty spread wide enough so the writers of The Simpsons in the '80s and Batman the Animated Series in the '90s were aware of it? Essentially a modern folk song circulated through oral tradition in schoolyards and playgrounds. Viral before the internet. Writer Rob Weir, who has investigated these questions in the past, believes that it may have spread through kids from military families who would learn it and as their families moved from base to base around the country, share it in their new schools. In fact, the first known mention of Jingle Bells, Batman Smells in print is in a January 1967 column in the Lawton Constitution, where Bill Crawford mentions that the daughter of a military officer transferred from the U.S. to Belgium is now teaching her new classmates Jingle Bells, Batman Smells to the kids there. Another classic American export. So that wraps up this edition of Batman 66, Myths, Mysteries, and Little Known Facts. This has been Boss City Brian, and I'll be back soon with another edition. Be sure to join me. Same boss time, same boss channel. Many blessings. Bye for now.